Greetings. Thank you to everyone for coming out to our group author reading. This reading is brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and other underrepresented gender identity authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through events like our bi-monthly virtual QuickRead sessions. You can find out more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the handout we'll provide in the chat and by visiting our website, a link to which will also be added to the chat. I'd also like to take a moment to thank those who have made a tip jar donation. We appreciate you so much. I'm your host today, Sarah Smith, and you can find out more about me in the provided handout as well. Please note, by the way, that recording of this session by the audience isn't allowed, and in general, recording of electronic communications, including Zoom meetings and webinars without permission, is illegal. Today, we'll be featuring 6 authors: Marie Parks, Tiffany Morris, A.M. Scott, Cindy O'Quinn, K.R.S. McEntire, and Angela M. Sanders. Each author will have 8 minutes to read. Our first reader is Marie Parks. Marie Parks's co-written debut, Unrelenting, was published by Not a Pipe Publishing in 2022. It won the 2022 New Mexico Arizona Book Award for Best LGBTQ title, and Marie was a finalist for the 2021 Futurescapes Award for Most Promising New Author. She lives in New Mexico with her rescue chihuahuas. Marie, take it away.
Thank you so much, and hello, everyone. This excerpt is from Chapter 3 of Unrelenting, where Bridget is investigating the last place her sister was seen, an alley outside an abandoned warehouse. Bridget rocked onto her tiptoes and peered through a gap between 2 of the planks covering the window's broken glass. Inside was a litter-filled hallway with a concrete floor and shadowy walls. A broken light fixture hung from a wire overhead. There was a faint thud. She tilted her head closer to the window, listening, and then she heard voices. They were too far away for her to make out, but the building definitely wasn't empty. Her heart thumped as she held her breath. Distant footsteps accompanied the low murmur of conversation. "Your fault. Rude of you to blame me. Why shouldn't I?" A woman and a man. They were getting louder. Bridget strained to get a clear view of the hallway, but it was still empty. "What do you suggest?" the man asked. "Nothing yet. Ugh, this place stinks." Bridget's breath caught. She knew that voice. It was Detective Ivanova, the detective on her sister's missing person case. Through the gap in the boards, Bridget watched her step from the hall, from somewhere deeper into the building. The detective was in profile to Bridget, walking beside a man with hair so bright red it stood out even in the shadowed hallway. Bridget tensed, ready to bolt if they headed in her direction. But they turned the opposite way. The detective took a few steps, then stopped in her tracks. Her companion paused with her, and they both stared at an interior wall for a long moment. "Who put that there?" The detective's voice was sharp. "None of us." Ivanova reached out to run her hand along the wall's dusty surface. Then she started. "Did you see that? It's active." Bridget wished she could make it out what they were looking at, but the angle was all wrong, and the dusty window made it impossible to see clearly. It was as if there was some sort of clue, some indication of why Dahlia had disappeared. She really needed to get inside. "Get back," the red-headed man said in alarm. "I want to know what it does." The detective kept her hand pressed against the wall. Just then, movement along the floor caught Bridget's eye. It was hard to tell through the grimy glass, but it looked like the edges of the cinder blocks were shifting and fuzzing. The haze materialized into smoke. It was dark and roiling, like a miniature thundercloud that bubbled as it spread outward. Her heart gave an uncomfortable thud as the substance seeped from the seam Where the concrete floor met the cracked walls, it pooled around Ivanova and her companion's ankles, staying low. Focused on the wall, they didn't appear to notice the smoke as it began to advance down the hallway. Bridget noticed the man glare at the detective. "Let's go. This is dangerous." Bridget watched, rooted to the spot. Was the building on fire? Maybe she should call out to them. A sulfuric, heavy stench hit her, and she clapped a hand over her mouth to muffle a cough. She turned away from the window, trying not to gag, and froze. Like a predator stalking prey, the murky substance squeezed out from beneath the metal door. Beside her, and slunk in her direction. With a horrified gasp, Bridget turned and ran. Inside the building, she heard a cry of alarm. Before she could react, something snagged her ankle, tugging her backwards. Bridget pitched forward, arms windmilling, gut clenching. One hand caught the edge of a twisted rain gutter, and she managed to stay upright. She looked down. A tendril of smoke had lashed itself to her boot, clinging to her like a rope. As she watched, a tendril shot forward to ensnare her other leg. It yanked her foot out from under her. As she collapsed to her knees, heart pounding in her ears, she grabbed the strange ropes. Pain seared her bare palms as they came into contact with the smoke. She yelped and jerked back. An angry red mark stretched across both hands. Bridget twisted and tried to scramble away, but the more she struggled, the more evident it became she couldn't escape. The smoke crawled up her leg, and she scrambled for something she could use to fight it off. Her hand landed on a broken beer bottle, and she sliced through the bond. They disappeared briefly, and she yanked one leg free, but before she could swing at the ropes holding her second leg, it surged forward. Scalding heat pressed against her as it wound around her legs and reached for her torso. Abruptly, the window exploded outward. The wooden boards covering it burst free just inches above Bridget's head. They slammed into the opposite wall of the alley and fell to the ground with a clatter. The force of the explosion ripped the smoke free from her ankles. A rush of hot air drove Bridget against the brick wall. She clapped her arms over her head and bit back a scream as shards of glass rained against her coat. The pandemonium gave way to stillness, pierced by a shrill, tinny ring in her ears. Beyond it, all Bridget could hear was the thudding of her heart. She drew in a raspy breath to steady herself. Head throbbing, she peeked up from her crouched position. A faint haze lingered in the alleyway, but the strange smoke was gone. Bridget's scraped knees ached as she pulled herself into a standing position. She leaned against the wall and looked towards the window. Inside, the man was smothering a flame, licking the hem of his pants, while the detective was doubled over. Was she hurt? Maybe Bridget should call for help. But no, the detective was laughing. Did you see that? Ivanova straightened, gasping for breath around her amusement. Bridget had never known the even-keeled, disapproving detective to so much as crack a genuine smile. Maybe the explosion had jostled her brain. Or maybe she knew more than she was letting on. Not her problem. Bridget needed to leave before they spotted her. The detective had made it quite clear that she was not to interfere in the case. Once Bridget was back at her hotel, she could try to piece together what had happened and how it was connected to her sister. I will find Dahlia, she thought, even if I have to face that smoke again, even if I have to do it alone. Thank you so much, everyone. If you sign up for the giveaway, you will receive discussion questions for your book club about Unrelenting and admission to my co-authors and my writing archive, which has new stories every month. And this is a perk that is usually only reserved for our Patreon supporters. Additionally, one lucky winner will receive an Unrelenting swag pack, including a signed book plate by both authors, stickers, a magnet, and a temporary tattoo. Thank you all again.
Very, very nice. And a wonderful collection of swag. Thank you, Marie. Our second reader is Tiffany Morris. Tiffany Morris is and I'm going to totally screw up this pronunciation, Tiffany Lnusku Migma. How are we doing? Would you pronounce it for us?
Certainly. And you know what? I'm reclaiming the language myself, so I might not even get it perfect. It's Ulnusku.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ulnusku. Migma, writer from Nova Scotia. She is the author of the swampcore horror novella Green Fuse Burning. and the Elgin-nominated horror poetry collection, and Elegies of Rotting Stars. Her work has appeared in Nightmare, Uncanny, and Apex Magazine, among others. Tiffany, over to you.
Well, Ellen, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here tonight to hear some spooky poetry. I don't think there are any content warnings for what I'll be reading tonight. Just a general warning that it is horror, so it deals with some difficult subject matter. I'll start off with here, have some ghost stories. Have you ever seen a ghost? What about when you can't remember a word that you know? Or the times when you try to forget something and can't seem to forget it? In that space, there are ghosts. Have you ever killed anything? Look, everyone has killed something. Everyone has stepped on a bug or killed bacteria or bought something from some faraway, unpronounceable, or unnamed place. In that machinery, there are ghosts. Have you ever thought about the end of time? Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. The term for the fireworks you see behind your closed eyes is phosphenes. The term for the precise darkness of closed eyes is Eigengrau. Another term for apparition is eidolon. A forerunner is an omen of death, an odd occurrence or the image of a person appearing before they die. There are nights when the souls of those who are fated to die in the next year form a procession. The future dead walking, not alive or dead, or entirely alive and soon to be dead, somewhere in the periphery of time and ending. We do not know that the soul exists. In this space, there are ghosts. This one is called This Is Where There Is Nothing. 1. Remembrance. Somewhere else something is burning. Horizons gulp shrapnel, jagged like chipped teeth. Let the moment rot gray at the edges. Surrender your memories to coastline erosion. That's my cat. At some point, the future will abandon itself. Try not to dwell. It isn't safe here or there. Back away slowly. There is the sound of one wave clapping. Salt into nothing. The no wind breathes here. Somewhere in the sky, time is evaporating into hissing stars. Meteor, tremor, tsunami waves make lonely sand shadows. The women crying. Voices echo into nothing. No one left, leaving. Grief is a faded tiger lost from the empty city zoo. It stalks us through sun-drenched streets, buzzing with ghosts. 2. Wintering. Oil paper, the sky in spectacle, borne through come ahead of cyclones, pavement slick with salt melt. We're forgetting something. Stop here, there, a meadow. Narcissus papyricius, whispering an Ozark soliloquy, waist deep in witness. There, a field gone silent. Breath carries skyward, do not linger. There is a plague here of snow on blood on snow. 3. Afterward. Night tells us nothing. An abandoned city. Blank maps and concrete scrubbed in neon. Tall grass swaying on empty lawns. An alarm sounds somewhere to no one. Streetlights on sky rubbed raw. Houses, callous on bone. Wooden stairs collapse and creak. This is where there is nothing. Exit, a humid exhale. Rain-black trees stretching the moment threadbare. Time is gnarled on a branch. Memory clings to vacant buildings as voices follow behind us. This one is called In the Distance. It previously appeared in Augur magazine. In the Distance. A woman is laughing to love songs on the radio. Her vintage gold Cadillac stalling where streetlights stretch thin. Pull over to the shoulder. Notice how her sigh tastes. There is smoke somewhere in a forgotten field. Behold her bruised-knuckled beauty. Bite your lip and prick your hand on rose petals. Rub your tongue over the coral ledge of a chipped tooth. It draws blood, or it doesn't. There is decay somewhere and salt on your hand. Grab at nothing. grab at her gray laughter. She'll burst into 1,000 embers and vanish clear into the darkening cathedral of stars. This one is called In Death the House is Everywhere. I dream most often of houses and the dead. In my nightmares, I move from room to room to room, crawl through passageways, witness empty pews as I visit the wakes of the missing dead. There is green satin everywhere, strange bedsheet shrouds, shining artificial meadows. I am comforted and not afraid. Absent grief burns the air to smoke. These houses always smell like old wood, a sweet dust smell, time stuck inside rafters. Sometimes I crawl through them and come to a dead end. Sometimes the passage closes its jaws tight around me. Certain nights, I dream I am a mother. In sleep, birth symbolizes death. Meaning has a womb. A blank space scrawled over by a shaking hand. Dreaming is its call. In these houses, there are always attics and basements. There are never windows, so I cannot see my face. In dreams, the house is the mind. In life, the house is the body. In death, the house is everywhere. That one is based on some real nightmares I was having when I was going through it one year, so I decided to turn it into poetry, because why not? I have just 2 more poems. I might finish under time. This one is called Rewilding Under Those Conditions, and this is one of my climate rage poems. Stick this time, as in half-formed century, with a pin into the butterfly thorax, into embolism. There is not a word in every language for extinction event, but sometimes there are a few words for burning. Neamglagdijig, they appear burning. Nugwalagig, I set it on fire. Gahoktegel, they are burned through. A cathedral into skeleton, irritation into sensation, ozone into nothing. And it's not just forests, Nipgudal, that burn, that fall. And it's not just the prisoners whose hands hold this water they hold for no money, for nothing. There isn't much forest left here in our territory, but there are ashes, remnants, golf courses smoking in cinders, more beautiful than barbed wire on any cleared sky day by far. What is more beautiful than every golf course burning and rewilding with the things that grow under those conditions? Wildflowers, probably. Mushrooms and moss and all of it blooming like seizing. After the fire was gone, after hands held water, and mansions became lanterns, a snake was found, jaws open and hissing, having bitten the fire as it burned. I think that was based on some real news headlines during one of the seasons of wildfires in California, and there were people still golfing and golf courses ablaze, and that picture of the snake was a real picture that I found online, so quite moving, and it moved me to write. So this last poem is called Crossroads. It appeared in Nightmare magazine, and it's based on real life folklore that I've heard based on the reserve that my family is from, Eskazoni. I grew up off reserve, but still managed to hear some pretty stirring ghost stories. So Crossroads. The perfect Mundu, devil, is described as human, not human, a thought in the body, a giant human owl. Megweg, blood red, an abandoned house, the subject of applause. When he arrives, Gwiliu Megwegig, look for the red ones. Wajuet, Debnuset Nije, it is now a full moon. He does not melt, like shape and form, metal eyes and horns, a tree branch. Bedasenmat, he comes walking with a lighter torch. When they see him walking on the road, many people are afraid to show their thoughts and be revealed. So that was all poetry from Elegies of Rotting Stars. That is available. I think it might still be on sale on Amazon. You can also get it through King's Co-op Bookstore. And for the giveaway, I have electronic advanced reading copies of Green Fuse Burning, which is coming out on Halloween. So thank you so much for listening, and thanks for being here. Willalin.
Tiffany, thank you, and congratulations on Green Fuse Burning.
Thank you.
Our third reader is A.M. Scott. After 20 years as a U.S. Air Force Space Operations Officer, A.M. now operates a laptop, trading satellites for fictional spaceships. A.M.'s writing cave is deep in the mountains of western Montana. And A.M. is also a volunteer leader with Team Rubicon Disaster Response. Go, A.M.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm reading from chapter 3 as well. My main character, Terri of Jericho, has been traveling the universe under the alias of Carrie Sisson, a scholar of ancient music, Filk, actually, if you know what that is. And she is now meeting the crew of Lightwave Fold Transport. One little note, I wrote this back in 2014, and some people hate my portrayal of Chef Laura Lee, who is transgender. I might change a few things on her if I was to write this today, but I do want to make it very clear that she is drawn from people that I definitely know and love. And I gave her a very flamboyant character on purpose. And it's because she's fun. So on to the reading. Purser Lowe cleared his throat, and the sparse chatter quieted. Gentle beings, welcome to Lightwave Fold Transport, Captain Ruger. He waved a hand at the glowering man at the head of the table. Myself and the crew welcome all of you. If there is anything you require to make this journey more pleasant, please let us know. We cannot guarantee anything beyond the contractual terms, but we will attempt to fulfill reasonable requests. He looked at the artiste, a bland expression on his face as he said, reasonable. Terri guessed there'd been unreasonable requests already. Chef in training, Laura Lee, will be starting the service shortly. First, I'd like to introduce Maintenance Officer Boer. Lowe waved to an older man seated down the table from her who nodded gravely. He wore the same lightweight dark blue coveralls, his name and title on his breast, but his looked a little wrinkled. Security officers Tyrone and Katrin Fazier will be your servers tonight as a favor to the chef. A few more notes about Lightwave. We provide water and power per your contract. We will charge for amounts above that, and excessive use will result in metering. We are a small transport with limited resources. Please be cognizant of this. The purser carefully avoided the artiste's gaze. He smiled again. The transport is full. The observation lounge is open to all beings who can tolerate human standard and auto beverage services available and some snacks. The dining schedule is in your contract. Please avoid the dining facility at other times, as our chef in training requires time to prepare and study. There are no guarantees chef will prepare any meals other than our formal dinners, but everything is wonderful under chef's guidance. Again, welcome to Lightwave. Please introduce yourselves later. Full introductions would be too time-consuming and might interrupt chef's production, a total tragedy of massive proportions, formerly unknown in the entire universe. The purser grinned at something behind Terri, and she turned to look and then stared. The vision in the hatchway was dazzling. No, she was more than dazzling. It was no effort to put on the shocked and surprised face of her scholar persona. In the hatchway, a rather large human female dressed in chef's whites posed in, but those weren't standard chef's whites. The head-to-toe, form-fitting, startling white wasn't even in the same galaxy with standard. The sleeves and upper part of the dress were sheer, stretched over, almost exposed in very generous assets, perched above a corset of shiny white material with buckles of crystal-colored silver marching down the front. The cinched-in waist looked painfully tight above wide, curved hips. Below the corset, a gown of white scaled material clung to the being's thighs, flaring above the knees into a bias-cut skirt with fold upon fold of material, the hem dazzling with long strings of crystal beading, like a fantasy sea creature. Below the skirt, shiny white, ridiculously high platform boots peeked out. If Terri tried to wear those, she'd break her neck. A tiny caricature of a chef's toque perched jauntily on bobbed chin-length mass of white, shiny white hair, with crystal ear coverings spiking up and through the hair. The chef's face was a moon of smooth, ultra-dark chocolate with big amber eyes, surrounded by long, sparkling white lashes, and finished with a generous mouth of shocking scarlet. She wasn't sure how old, but based on the other cues, somewhere around 30 standard years. And while her heaving bosom said female, something hinted otherwise. Perhaps Chef was gender fluid? Terri would have to ask about Chef's preferred pronouns. All in all, a picture hard to forget. Also, a picture hard to look past, but Terri did, noting the presence of subtle bulges low on the corset, disguised below the ruffles. Weapons or spices? Impossible to tell. Darlings, the chef exclaimed in her low, throaty voice, spreading her arms in a dramatic gesture. Tonight, I present a feast to you, a feast for the senses, a feast which will never be forgotten, a feast beyond compare, a feast you will rave about for years to come. I now present the first course, a Langrothian bisque with rare black Syrian truffle shavings, accompanied by a Francois bruschetta à la garlic. Enjoy. 2 humans, one male, one female, exited the kitchen bearing trays of small china bowls and napkin-covered baskets. They also wore white, but simple, lightweight uniform ship coveralls rather than custom designer wear. They wore black harnesses over those, securing hand weapons of every type, stunners, blasters, knives, and others Terri had no names for. A chill ran down her spine. That much hardware seemed like overkill for a dinner party. The female plopped a bowl in front of Terri and a basket thunked above her place setting. Despite the rough delivery, the bowl released a mouth-watering scent of rich brown butter tinged with the saltiness of a sea. White wine poured into her glass. Terri looked around at her fellow diners, wide-eyed, and then at the captain, telegraphing the need for a cue. The captain scowled at the chef. With a sigh, he picked up his spoon, a tiny utensil lost in his thick white hand. Raising it, he looked around the table with a pained look and grimace and intoned, "Enjoy." He spooned up the soup and swallowed. The corners of his mouth lifted for a split second. The chef lit up with triumph and whirled with a flounce, the crystal beads clattering as she retired to the kitchen. Terri didn't try to cover her delight. It was the best theater she'd seen in a long time. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to sign up for the giveaway. The ebook of Lightwave Nexus Station is free on all retailers. So if you want to pick that up.
Thank you, AM. You've made us all hungry. Our 4th reader is Cindy O'Quinn. Cindy O'Quinn is an Appalachian writer who grew up in the mountains of West Virginia. In 2016, Cindy and her family moved to the northern woods of Maine, oh, poor dear, where she continues to write horror stories and dark poetry because it's so good. Cindy is a 4-time Bram Stoker Award final nominee. Her poetry has been nominated for an Elgin, Riesling, and Dwarf Star Awards. Cindy, it's yours.
Lydia, did I ever tell you about the time I walked into your room? Lydia stared dead ahead and did not acknowledge her sister's presence in the room. much less the question she had asked. Rose continued, I was 13, so that would have made you 9, almost 10. I remember because it was the year after Mom almost killed Dad. Anyway, I walked into that pitiful little room of yours. Remember, you had the one at the end of the hall? The paint on the walls was horribly cracked, and regardless of repainting, the cracks came back like dark veins bleeding through under thin skin. I don't even think it was a bedroom at all, more like a storage closet. But you were so excited to have your own room when we moved into that old house. I walked in, not all the way, but just inside the door, and there you were on the floor, your stubby little index finger in a wad of your ginger hair, twirling it round and round. It was a nervous habit that you held on to for years. And you had these makeshift dolls. Friggin' hideous monsters would be closer to the truth. And you were talking to them. They were lined up in a row, at least 3 of them. And you were whispering so soft and sweet to them, like they were precious little angels. Do you want to know what else you did? You leaned over real close and put your ear next to one of the dolls' mouths. That image haunts me to this day. It's burned into me, and I'll not soon forget it. I get chills thinking about that grotesque thing, possibly murmuring to you, speaking some angel or demon language that only you, its creator, could understand. Did they speak to you? Did they call out your name when you grew lonesome without them near you or you near them? I left your room without saying a word because I was afraid of you, Lydia, my little sister, the one I was supposed to protect and look after. I watched you all the time after that. It's hard to believe, but you never knew it. You never felt me near. Or maybe you did. I watched as you gathered parts to make your little followers, or whatever they were. Rubber arms tossed from passing car windows along the road, decapitated plastic heads that were shaved and no longer wanted left in the park. You hit the jackpot at the town dump. Entire dolls sometimes, but you still rearrange them with other parts. Old marbles for eyes, buttons for ears, scissors, and even a machete for an arm. All held together with string, electrical tape, and school glue. And they were never complete until you painted their nails black to match your own. You had 6 little ones as your captive audience. More than just a tidbit creepy, sis. We never really talked about religion. It was another one of those things that I just assumed. I mean, we each wore the tiny wooden cross necklaces on leather cords. I thought you knew what that represented. Do you remember that Christmas when the Baptist church ladies brought those and other gifts for us? I don't think Mom would have accepted the presents from them had we not been peeking in from the kitchen. I'm not sure why, but it was as if though she thought the gifts were poisoned by those women. I don't mean literally, but they weren't given with the best intentions or something. Hell, I'm not sure what I mean. I do know that within a few months, one by one, those gifts disappeared, all but the necklaces around our necks. Do you remember how Dad cried when Mom made him leave? It wasn't long after she'd nearly killed him. I wondered if maybe you knew why she wanted him dead. I didn't know a man could cry like that. I had never seen it before, and I haven't since. He cried himself a river, and he got drunk and almost drowned in it. How twisted is that? Our dad drowning in a river of tears, or a bathtub, whatever. People don't stay together forever anymore, not husbands and wives anyway. For years, I blamed Mom for making Dad leave. I knew there couldn't be a good enough reason for her to split up our family. I hated her for not telling me. I convinced myself there wasn't a reason. She was just being a bitch. A ding-dang bitch. Remember when we used to say ding-dang it to everything? We were happy then, ding-dang it. Surely you remember Mom losing her mind. What a fine and dandy time that was. It was just enough to bring the church ladies back here to have another looky-loo. They certainly got more than they came for when Mom told them that their snooping hadn't worked when they had been there the first time, sent by dear old Dad. And it sure as hell wasn't going to work now that he was gone. Lydia, that interaction between Mom and the church ladies confused me for a good while. But it eventually came to me. Dad had found religion, and those gifts were from him. That's why Mom wanted rid of them, and she would have done away with every last one had we not kept those crosses around our necks all the time. I tried to get all the answers out of her, but her end was so near. It was useless. Her eyes were glazed over like one of your zombie dolls. And then poof, Mom was gone too. I was 18, so of course I was given guardianship over my little sister. Oh, how sweet it was in the beginning. You loved me then. Just me taking care of my fragile younger sister. Fragile or not, those hideous creations had to go. What would people have thought? That you were weird? And I couldn't have that. The good people in the neighborhood wouldn't have donated to weird, but they certainly donated to orphans. That's what we were, you know. Everyone in the neighborhood, as well as the church ladies, had a field day doting over us. And the donations seemed endless. All good things eventually end, or whatever the hell the saying is. You grew up, and you wanted to leave. Leave me. That fragile little girl who'd grown up talking to angels that were made from her love and plastic parts that no one else wanted. Ungrateful. You were so ungrateful. If you only knew what I did for you. I kept Dad happy. I kept him from visiting your pitiful little room late at night. And when Mom went crazy, I kept you safe from catching her madness. It was contagious as hell. I bet you didn't know that. Lydia sat stiff, ankles permanently crossed, hands folded neatly in her lap. A rusted zipper served as a no longer speaking mouth. Mismatched marbles where eyes used to be. Dozens of smelly cardboard pine trees hung in her hair and on her clothes, held in place by clothespins, a failing effort to mask the rot. Rose added a fresh coat of black polish to her sister's yellowed nails to match her own. The end.
Okay, Nydam sleeping tonight. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank y'all for having me.
Our fifth reader is KRS McEntire. KRS. Hello. KRS McEntire is from the generation that dashed through platform 9 3/4. Yeah. Fell in love with vegetarian vampires and motorcycle riding werewolves, and took down a corrupt government during the Hunger Games. McEntire remembers how magical it felt to follow wardrobes into unimaginable worlds, and she hopes to bring that same joy to the next generation. Oh boy. Go for it, KRS McEntire.
Well, I will be reading an excerpt from A Dance of Blood and Destiny. It is a fantasy adventure with fae and vampires based on African mythology. I'm going to read from chapter 5. Taya's favorite room in the palace was the library. Though it mostly contained historical documents and religious texts, it also held memories of her father chasing her through aisles of books, threatening her with tickles as she giggled. It was where the two of them had snuggled up together as he read her stories, sung her songs, and reminded her that she could be just as brave as the people in her favorite books. The library was also where she learned about the world around her, despite having never left home, perusing maps and encyclopedias. But when Kea crept into the library that night, she was looking for one book in particular. She ran her fingers reverently over the gilded spines of ancient tomes until she found the book she sought. The thick leather-brown book was covered in dust and grime, untouched for hundreds of years. She held it gingerly as she wiped dust off the cover and slipped back to her room, book in hand. In her room, Kea covered her body in a dark purple shawl and tiptoed to the window. She pushed it open, her teeth chattering as a cool breeze blew in. It was rare for the island to get so cold. From her window, she had a nice view of the palace courtyard. She scanned the grounds to make sure no one was out for a late night stroll. She couldn't let anyone see what she had planned to do next, or they might alert her mother. She rubbed her arms for warmth, then hopped on her windowsill. A familiar tingle of magic spread through her body as she spread her magnificent golden wings, leapt out of the window, and glided down towards the ground. It had been a while since Kea had used her wings. She typically wore a corset that was tight against her back and kept her wings confined on formal occasions. Otherwise, billowy tunics and dresses easily draped over them when she wanted to feel a little less stiff. Aziza's made tunic with detachable panels on the back, allowing access to their wings if the occasion called for them. As she slipped them out of her tunic, they stung from being confined all day. The cool air bit her skin as she let herself slowly coast, but she didn't mind. She was cold, but she was free. On her way down, Kea paused at Mia's window and tapped on the glass. Mia sat up in her bed and gave Kea a disapproving frown. Kea offered a cheeky grin and continued to glide. Mia wouldn't rat her out, but with all the murders taking place, she wanted someone to have a clue where she had gone. Blanketed by the dark sky, Kea made her way from the seaside kingdom to the woods. Usually, she was fearful of the forest at night, where deadly spriggans blended in with trees and will-o-wisps hunted for victims. And what of the guards that her mom had mentioned at the town hall meeting? Could they be out here already? But nothing was more terrifying than losing Teo. The journey would be worth the risk. Moonlight slithered through tree branches that stretched above her, lighting the familiar path to Teo's home. Soon she spotted a small wooden cabin in the distance. Kea wasn't a praying woman. She stopped praying to Eloah as a child when all of her prayers about her father coming home went unanswered. However, the fear of losing Teo worried her enough to say a silent prayer to Eloah. It would take a supernatural miracle for Teo to understand after what she had done. Kea's hands trembled as she pounded on the wooden door. Damp green moss that grew upon the small hand-built home smeared over Kea's fists. She wiped them on her silky shawl with no concern for the stain. Nearby birds, critters, and insects fled from the offending sounds. Kea watched the bugs fly off, wondering if Teo could be slipping away incognito. "Teo," she screamed, "come out." Her voice was the only sound in the forest. She might have thought he hadn't returned home, but his hunting bow caught her eye, tossed carelessly on the ground near the door. She forced herself to quiet down and listen to the other side of the door. The patter-patter of footsteps sounded as he approached, but he paused at the door without opening it. "Teo, please," she begged. "I know you're inside. I can hear you, and I just want to talk." "Well, I don't," he said without opening the door. "Teo," her eyes burned and her throat tightened. She tried to blink away the tears that threatened to spill. Eventually, she heard him fiddle with the lock, and the door swung open with force. He glared at her with furious red eyes. "How long have you been stringing me along, engaged to the elf?" he growled. She opened her lips to speak, then slammed them shut when words seemed to not come out. "What was I to you this whole time? Was I a wild fling to get out of your system before you settle down and marry a prince?" "I don't want to marry him," Kea clarified. "My mother is forcing me." "You're a grown woman, Kea. Your mother cannot force you." "That is not how it works for people like me. I've been bound by duty my whole life." It doesn't matter. I know how you Fae do things. You'll be his bride in a few weeks. What is the point of you coming here? I should have told you, Kea mumbled. I didn't know how to tell you. I don't care anymore. He looked away, refusing to meet her gaze, but his crimson eyes were misty. It just is what it is. It matters, Kea said, taking a step closer. She hid the heavy book under her shawl, unsure when would be the right time to show him. You matter, and I will not marry him. I will marry you. Teo scoffed. I thought you didn't have a choice. Well, I volunteered for the trials, Kea said, so the wedding is canceled for now. Teo grew silent, his muscles tensing at her words. You did what? I'm competing in the Eldritch trials. No, he said firmly, his anger replaced with fear. Lines of worry wrinkled his forehead. You can't do that. Why can't I? Kea asked. I should have a say in my own destiny. Well, do you think it's your destiny to die, Kea? Teo asked. People train for years to succeed in the trials. You, beloved, are accustomed to being protected, but no one will care who your family is during the trials. Well, that actually sounds refreshing, Kea said. Besides, entering the trials is the only safe way to visit Elderton. And Elderton is the last place my father said he wanted to go before he disappeared. Teo frowned. You think your father is on the island? I think it's my best bet to find out what happened to him. And that is my excerpt. And also, I will be doing a giveaway as well. You can win an ebook copy of A Dance of Blood and Destiny. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Our final reader is Angela M. Sanders. Our final reader is Angela M. Sanders. Angela M. Sanders is the author of the best-selling Which Way? Librarian Cozy Mysteries and the Joanna Hayworth Vintage Clothing Mysteries. Ooh, vintage clothing. As Clever Tate, she wrote the Kite Shop Cozy Mysteries. When Angela isn't at her laptop, she's often lounging with a vintage crime novel at home in Portland, Oregon. Angela, take it away.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm reading from Witch Upon a Star, as you can see there on the screen, which stars the protagonist is Josie Way, and she's a librarian, and she's a witch. She has books talk to her. That's important for you to know as you listen to this segment. In the bit that I'm going to read, it's about 5 minutes. Josie and her sister Jean are trying to break into Desmond's room in a retreat center. Desmond is potentially a murderer. They know Desmond's tied up, not literally tied up, but he's down at the tavern. So they're trying to sneak into his room. And that's where we start. And that's where we'll see a little bit of Josie's magic. The retreat was solidly constructed, and its strong wooden floors were silent as we crept upstairs. The hall light was off, but the floor-to-ceiling windows in the main room shed enough light that once our eyes adjusted, we were fine. Jean glanced at me, then tried Desmond's door. The knob turned, but the door remained closed. Shoot, she whispered. Too bad I don't have my phone, or we could look up lockpicking online. I might be able to help. Hang on. In the Landings mini library, surely one of the crime novels had a lockpicking scene that could instruct us. We returned to the landing, and I motioned for Jean to take a chair. I centered my energy and cleared my mind. Books, show me how to break into a room. At once, the books trembled with life. A sparkle of white light shot off some of them. 2 thrillers, 3 cozies, and a Mickey Spillane mystery flew to the end table next to the armchair. Jean's mouth fell open. That's so cool. The thriller, hardback, opened to a scene with a jewel heist. The protagonist and his team were circumventing the museum's high-tech alarm system. Too sophisticated for us. I tapped that book, and it flew back to its shelf to slip between 2 other novels. Jean watched in bald amazement. Next, the Mickey Spillane. I placed my palm on its cover. A rough voice with a deep Brooklyn accent recited a break-in, thrumming with suspense. I jolted as the novel's hero kicked in a door. Nope, not for us either. I flicked my fingers at it, and it shot to its shelf. Cozies ran the gamut, I knew. Some were more accurate in detail than others. I closed my eyes and ran my hands over them, all too aware that Desmond or Rex might return at any moment. One cozy described breaking into a room secured with a skeleton key and an old lock like we had at the library. It's not a skeleton key lock, is it? I whispered to Jean. If it is, it's a cinch. Push out the key from the inside on a sheet of paper. Pull the sheet of paper into the door and use the key to open from the inside of the door. Nope, Jean said. The building's too new. Besides, we want to break in, not out. Right. I focused again on the books. Bingo. My hand stopped at a bedroom break-in. Sure, the book featured a bed and breakfast in Cape Cod, but the situation was the same. The scent of warm blueberry muffins rose from the pages. The narrator was a sassy woman about my age, a burned-out caterer from the big city who'd unexpectedly inherited a charming Queen Anne cottage from her aunt. She described cracking a simple doorknob lock. I've got it, I said, slipping the book into my coat pocket. We need 2 butter knives from the kitchen. Wait here. Light as a cat, Jean disappeared down the stairs and returned moments later with the knives. Following Jean, I padded down the hall. She stopped in front of Desmond's door and looked at me before trying the knob again. Still locked. Hold this, I whispered. I set the book in Jean's hands. It's warm, she said in surprise. The book is. Too hot? No, I like it. It's almost as good as gloves. Just hold it and let me concentrate. I half closed my eyes and let the novel's words guide me. Instantly, the rush of a seaboard storm filled my head. The heroine of the book, Brittany, was in the attic of a remote cabin, struggling to free her bound and gagged neighbor from a locked bedroom while the murder stalked the grounds. Hands shaking, Brittany drew the old butter knife from her pocket. Hang on, Mrs. Goldblum, she whispered. I'm coming. Muffled groans reached her ears. Quickly, but with the precision born of years of icing petit fours, Brittany inserted the knives into the door frame, one above and one below the handle mechanism. She jiggled them with swift but sure motions. My motions weren't particularly swift nor sure, and the knives simply didn't fit into the door frame. Damn it. Duke had been foreman for the retreat center's construction. The man was too much of a perfectionist to set a door that didn't seal tightly. Now we're going back to the cozy. The storm raged. A slale roof tile grated as it tumbled from the roof and shattered on the ground, but its crash was a mere accent to the old house howling and creaking around them. At last, the bedroom door popped ajar and Brittany rushed in to loosen Mrs. Goldblum's gag. The older woman spat and said, Careful, Brittany, he's still out there. You're doing that all wrong. I jumped, flattening myself against the wall. Jean and I had been so intent on breaking into Desmond's room, we hadn't heard him arrive. Him, being Desmond. He stood impassive before us, his coat unzipped as if the winter outside were a mild breeze. My breath came too quickly for me to squeeze out words. Jean's eyes had widened to the size of Brittany's famed chocolate chip cookies, the recipe for which, the cozy informed me, was at the back of the book. That's it. The end.
Do we get the recipe for the chocolate chip cookies?
No, we don't. It's not that kind of cozy. You'll have to read the fake cozy to get it.
Or the hand warmer book. Hand warmer book.
Yeah, you have to be a witch for that, but you know.
Darn. Thank you so much, Angela. And thank you so much to everyone who came today.